Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last panel of the day. This is on the topic of accelerating the pace of spinoffs. My name is Kathryn Zavala. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Medtech Innovator, and I also am the Managing Director for our news program, which is called BioTools Innovator. I'm joined by our two excellent panelists today, Matt Michelson and Seungjun Yu. So I'm really excited to have them to talk today. I'll start by letting them each introduce themselves. So Matt, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thank you. So first, thank you for the opportunity to participate here. I'm real excited about the conversation. Hi, everyone out in the universe there. I'm Matt Michelson. I'm currently the president of Genesis AI, which is a company that does real-world evidence, both services and technology development. I was previously the CEO and the founder of a company called Evid Science. Relevant to this discussion, that was a company that was started with SBIR funding, then got venture funding, and then had an exit at the end of 2020. So really excited to talk about how we can commercialize, innovative new science and technology. Thank you.
Great, glad to have you here. And next we have June.
Yeah, so thank you for the intro, and nice to meet you all. My name is Seungjun, CEO of Dalton Bioanalytics. We are UCLA spin-off startup digitizing biochemical compositions of biofluids. So as a UCLA spin-off startup, I'm happy to share my experience through the spin-off process and then answer any questions you guys have.
So let's start a little bit before we get into your companies and what you guys are doing now. Let's talk a little bit about the journey that got you here. Maybe you could share, what you were doing before your current company, your training or anything that led you kind of to where you are currently. So June, we'll just start with you.
Okay, so before this company, I was working at a company trying to solve diagnosis of congenital heart defects. So we are trying to develop a software that diagnoses congenital heart defects before birth. At the time, we were trying to use ultrasound data, images and videos, and we had a hard time to get the data, the consistent and clean data that can get some medical insight. So while I was looking for data, I met a co-founder, Austin, who said I can provide nearly thousands of biochemicals in a single assay. So that's how I started this company, end up here.
How about you, Matt?
Yeah, so the journey was, so I have a PhD in computer science from USC, and I spent a lot of time kind of doing both research, but also kind of industrial productization of that research. And a number of years ago, I connected with Steve Minton, who is another AI LA panelist you may have seen earlier in the day. And his company is called Infralink, and I was the chief scientist at that company. And the model of that company still is to raise government funding mostly through the SBIR, but also the STTR programs. And then we would spin out new companies to commercialize them. And one of the companies that we spun out in that process was Evid Science. And so I was so excited by the technology and the potential that I became the CEO of that company when we spun out, and then sold that company to Genesis, which is where I am now. And now we're growing this larger combined company, and it's been pretty exciting. So yeah, so always kind of at this intersection of product development, but also AI research.
That's great. And, again, congratulations to you and everyone at Evid Science on that acquisition. I'm sure it was a long time coming and well-deserved, and obviously the work continues. So before we kind of jump into, learning a little bit more about what each of you guys are doing, I thought it'd be fun for our audience to hear a little bit of a fun fact about you. At Medtech Innovator, it's kind of a tradition. We like to share something fun about ourselves and let the audience walk away with that. So I guess I'll start. I guess my fun fact is maybe something that everyone can relate to. I'm a new mom. I had my baby just before the pandemic. So in a way, I had a great transition from maternity leave into coming back to work, since I never had to leave home in some ways. So how about you, June? What's a fun fact about yourself?
Okay, fun fact of myself. I'm a foodie, so I prepare food for my wife at home, and I start to prepare food for my team members at company too now. Lunch, everyday lunch.
That's great. So what's kind of like your specialty? What's your favorite meal to prepare?
My specialties is mixing everything that I have. Yeah.
That's great. How about you, Matt?
So firstly, congratulations. That's exciting to have a baby. And also I'll say, June, it's a really impressive skill to just take whatever is around and make something useful out of it. So, that's commendable. Yeah, so I think for me, many people are surprised to learn that the past 7 years or so, I've been a Little League baseball coach. So from the littlest guys, 6-year-olds, up to about 12-year-olds now, they're beyond my abilities to coach them, so they have professional coaches. But I spent years and years and years as a Little League coach.
Very cool. Well, I definitely have been tuning into the Dodgers in this latest playoffs. Not looking so good, but I'm holding on to hope.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, let's dive back into it. I want to hear more about each of your companies. Obviously, this being part of AI LA, you guys are all working in that space. I know, Matt, you kind of already talked a little bit about your founding story. So, June, I want to turn to you and hear a little bit about how you got involved with your company and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, briefly, I was looking for data that is consistent and clean, and Austin invented a technology that can profile nearly all types of biochemicals in a single run. So what we do at Dalton is we can profile proteins, lipids, metabolites, and other small molecules in a single assay. So basically, we can get thousands of biochemicals data in one single sample in one single assay. So that's what we do. So yeah, and then this one was developed at UCLA while Austin, my co-founder, was doing his PhD.
It's great. And with your, your technology, are you guys using AI or machine learning to be able to look at all those molecules?
So we are using statistical models and machine learning to improve the quality of the data and to get some insight. But AI in the future, after we build the library and the data through our research collaborations, later we want to provide actionable insight and information to doctors and people in the future to improve their health.
Got it. And so, Matt, how about you? You talked a little bit about Evid Science and the acquisition by Genesis, but diving into more about what you guys did at Evid and then how that's integrated now with Genesis research.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the basis behind Evid Science was actually research that we were doing under an NIH SBIR phase 1 with the idea that there's just too many medical papers to read. If you have to go through and understand trends or themes or do something called a meta-analysis, which is kind of an aggregated statistical treatment of results from multiple papers. So we created an AI system that goes through the literature and essentially reads it for you and pulls out all the results automatically. So you can think of it as papers come in and then spreadsheets of results come out. And so that's really what Evid Science was focused on, which was developing the AI to do that in the first place. And the first area we concentrated on really were clinical trials. And so Evid was really focused on clinical trials. We started to get some observational data capabilities in as well. So in other words, papers that describe real world evidence studies. And when we were acquired, the main focus of Genesis is a lot of RW, real world evidence and reimbursement activities. So and those involve summarizing a lot of literature. So what we've done since then is dramatically expanded the model so that it can cover all sorts of different types of healthcare papers. So health economics papers, review articles, observational studies, epidemiology studies. And now the AI actually has 100 million facts that it understands from the literature. So it's an enormous amount of data. And this powers all sorts of different activities, from landscape analyses of treatments and outcomes, all the way to protocol and study design for real world evidence, to reimbursement documents for governments outside of the US, and how they're going to reimburse new products that are brought to market.
That's great. And so you did talk a little bit about, or a lot about, how you guys are using AI. And so maybe from a technological point of view, like how did you guys go about developing that, creating something really valuable?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question too. So, initially, the challenge I think always is, if you develop, really significant technology, what is the problem that you're actually going to solve? And in particular, the business problem that you're going to solve. So early on, we knew that we would have kind of a technical roadmap and an approach to extracting these results from the literature. And like any research project, our initial approach was like, okay, and then we got better, and then we got significantly better, right, on the third iteration. And that's how we kind of, made the technology just explode in capability. But simultaneous to that, we were having a lot of conversations with different people on the utility of what we were producing. And the idea was that we didn't want to just create cool technology for its sake, but we wanted to solve real business problems. And so I think we lined up 50 or 60 different conversations with folks in the world of insurance, in health systems, researchers like bench scientists, and then also pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. And it turned out that the pharma and biotech companies had such a significant need that we knew we would be able to serve that need more immediately than some of the others, like physicians or something like that. And so, we went kind of hand in hand with both the AI development, but also kind of the use cases, and then built a product that could combine them both.
And I guess one more, follow-up question before I want to bring June back into this. But, going back to, your technology, like, can you give kind of a use case or a real example if somebody has used it and what they've been able to accomplish?
Yeah, we have a lot. My favorite one is, so I mentioned this concept of a meta-analysis. And what you do in that activity is you go through all the papers that are related to what you care about, and then you take out the results and you do an aggregated statistical analysis of them. And it takes a long time, and it's very, very painful because you're reading papers and you're copying and pasting the results into Excel. And the tool can dramatically accelerate that. Sometimes by hand, they can take months, frankly. And so when hydroxychloroquine came out as a potential COVID cure or treatment, we did a meta-analysis using our platform in 30 minutes to demonstrate that there is a risk for ocular toxicity, so eye issues associated with that drug. And we published that in a journal, a bioinformatics journal. And it was a really great result because not only did it validate the technology, but it really validated the savings from weeks or months down to 30 minutes.
Well, that's very great to hear. It would be nice to hear more people reading that paper. But that's awesome. I'm glad you were able to share that use case. So June, back to you. You talked a little bit about Dalton, what you guys are working on there. Maybe also, a similar question. What are some use cases where you see this being used, or if it has already been applied?
I see. So we commercialize our technology right now in the research field. So we are working with pharmaceutical company, consumer companies, so that they can do some R&D activities or clinical trials. We want to use this one in the future for clinical purpose. So our vision is making one blood test that can diagnose hundreds of diseases. This can be done by collaborating with researchers who are working on unmet diagnosis needs. So we are building data, learn some insight, and then build a library, and later one test that can diagnose everything. So that's our vision.
That's great. And, kind of going off of that, in this industry, there's a lot of technology out there. And so just drilling into what really sets you apart from your competitors, what's kind of your secret sauce?
Okay. So before Dalton, to get the comprehensive data, doctors or researchers needed to divide the samples and send them to multiple different specialized laboratories. And then they need to have a bioinformatics team to integrate the data from different laboratories. That was a huge pain. So our edge is really generating all comprehensive biochemical analysis in a single sample and single run, so that we have less batch effects compared to other laboratories combined results, and also we charge fraction of the cost the other labs charge in combined. So yeah.
And that's great on the analysis side. When you talk a little bit about the sample that goes into it, is there any additional preparation that needs to be made, or is it pretty similar workflow, work stream? It's just a more elegant, simplified product that can tell you all these different things.
The sample preparation is pretty simple, same as other people. So our method, we try to leave everything in the sample as it is, and then we have a methodology. We use some chemicals, enzymatic knowledge and techniques, so that we can capture everything. We use different solvents, columns when we try to get the results. It's not simple. The process is not simple, but the concept is simple. One sample, one result. The process is very complex, and that's
right.
Our methodology that we got exclusive license from UCLA.
Great. And Matt, back over to you, talking about competitors in this space. Now that, Evid is part of Genesis Research, but how is Evid kind of giving it that competitive edge? What's the gap that you're fulfilling?
Yeah. First, I'll just mention that, as a computer scientist and not a biochemical scientist, I'm just very impressed with all the stuff behind June. With all that, looks very gives you a lot of credibility for what you're talking about. Looks like a chemistry lab. So, when you think about kind of the space of activities that people are doing, especially in reimbursement, where they're doing these landscape analyses or protocols development, things like that, the status quo is really human beings. And so, the first innovation in our field is really people starting to move away from human beings to kind of more search technologies, right? So there are a few other offerings that can help gather the papers for you and do like a light collection. And so, there's still a lot of people who will just hire a number of human beings and kind of outsource this activity. Then they've started to move towards some of these technologies that can group together the related papers. And then there's us, and we say, okay, we're not just going to give you the papers, we're giving you the actual data. Right? Like all of the results that were in these articles are now kind of at your fingertips for you to do analysis. So that's sort of been the trend. But we still bump up against competitors who are just people. And that's really on the Evid side. And so what Genesis is trying to build is really the next generation pharmaceutical services company. So, a lot of the activities that I was mentioning that are done by human beings are done by competitors of ours by hand. So you can hire them and they'll do all the literature pulling and extraction of the results, and they'll write up the final report for you, and then you as the biotech company send that along to whoever you need to. But now there's this layer of technology that can sit underneath all of the scientists that we have at Genesis. So rather than having to go through the literature by hand and extract all this data, they use Evid to do it, and then they provide their analysis and reporting at the end. So it's a dual way to address the problem, because some people just want to do it themselves, and so they can access all this data themselves. And then some people would hire us to develop all of this content for them. And then we can use the exact same tools internally to kind of improve how we do that.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like, beyond the insights, a lot of your value proposition is, the time savings. You're shrinking down these arduous manual processes that can take, I think, months or weeks, and now it's taking a few days or minutes. So that's great. Really cool to hear that. And June also, with your product, it sounds pretty amazing, almost too good to be true, but I'm sure it's going to be true. But that's really awesome. And I think we got a good sense of, where you guys are as far as the state of your technology, development stage. But I'm curious to hear, what's coming up in the short term. What are some next milestones that you guys are looking at as a company? So Matt, we'll start with you.
Sure. So, if you think about kind of the process of creating a lot of the content that goes out from these studies. So, stuff that goes out into regulators, let's say, or the insurance companies in the US, there's a multi-stage approach where you're getting all the data that you can from, say, the text and copying and pasting, and then you're starting to generate the reporting on top of that. There are actually a lot of figures sometimes that are involved and a lot of tables. And these are hard AI problems because the interpretation of figures and tables requires a lot of common sense. We wouldn't have been able to address these problems until recently, but now we have so much data that we're actually starting to build algorithms so that the machine can begin to interpret tables, begin to interpret survival curves in oncology and things like that. So that's one short-term activity, which is how much more deep can we go with this AI in the understanding of the text. And the flip side of that is actually starting to do some of the generation of the text. So our scientists are writing a lot of kind of boilerplate around the more exciting stuff that they get to do, right? So they're going to write a really compelling argument and a really compelling discussion, but the introduction is relatively standard for almost every scientific paper, which is why, most of the grad students are doing it for the professors, for instance, right? So if we can get the machine to start to generate these introduction sections by themselves, and then the human beings can come in and start to refine them, that lets the people concentrate on the more fun and creative tasks. And so the idea is generally that the machine will do all the things that you don't want to do, and then leave you to do all the things that you would.
No, that's great. And actually, when you're talking about it, I was thinking about, finishing up my PhD, my dissertation, and how useful this would have been in
we get that a lot.
in the introduction, and even, review papers. This would be incredible for that as well. So June, tell us about, Dalton and what's coming up in the short term for you.
Yeah, so to help people believe our technology, we are publishing our technology, our method in Q1. We are working with one of the top journals right now. After that, now we have closed about $500,000 sales contract. But next year we see 7-figure sales contract, and also we are going to open our A round next year.
Wow, that's great. And I'll be sure to read that. It's always good to see some technical validation out there. Great. So let's move into, the heart of today's topic and talking about, spinning out. You both have talked a little bit about, your journey, both of you coming out of an innovation kind of hub. So one being a university, one being Infralink. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. So I guess, Matt, for you, thinking back to the beginning, what was kind of the defining moment that said, okay, this is ready to be its own thing, to have its own company, its own team, its own investors? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. So, almost all of the technology that we developed were under SBIR and STTR grants, which are a terrific program. I'm happy to dig into that if people want to learn more. And as part of those, you do a light commercialization as you write those proposals of what you think will happen. And then during those activities, we would actually start to think about, well, what would the product look like? How can I align, conversations to what use cases I'm actually going to solve? We're big proponents of the lean startup. So for those of you out there who are familiar with that, you're going to set up a bunch of potential interviews with potential users and just talk to them. We found that actually as scientists, you have a leg up. You're not just a random person reaching out. People are willing to help scientists, especially if you frame it that way. So you can say, I'm a scientist, I'm doing this research. Would this have any applicability to what you do? And would you be willing to talk about it? And you'd be surprised how many people are. So, through cold email, that actually works well. And then what we would do is we generally say, okay, well, there is a sufficient use case. People are willing to pay for it. Now is the time where we're going to start to spin that out. And it's a little bit tricky because you do want to have some kind of gravity around that. Like multiple people should essentially say yes. You don't want to hang your hat on one person saying yes. But you also have to have enough internal drive to ask someone that question, which can be uncomfortable and kind of weird, right? Thank you for your time. Is this something that's interesting and you would pay for? But once you have that critical mass, that's when you start the journey. Now, the journey itself in the beginning, especially through pre-seed and seed funding, is going to be this exploration of the space until you get that product market fit. So, don't overly commit to what you're doing because it should change and it will change as you learn more about what you're doing. But generally, it's once we found that kind of consensus and there are multiple people that say, yes, this is a use case. It solves a problem I really have. I'm willing to pay for it. But just one anecdote, we actually printed out a slide and on a piece of paper, like physically printed out a slide. And then I went to a conference in San Diego, a biotech conference in San Diego, and just handed out this slide, which was like a picture of a mock-up of an interface, and said, this is what the tool would do. Is this useful to you? Because you don't want to lug a laptop around. And we got a lot of people say yes. A lot of people said, no, this is dumb. And from those kinds of conversations, you can really start to get a sense of what that momentum really will be.
That's great, Matt. And I think there's a lot to pull on there. I think, one of the things that has come across is really like kind of the storytelling, being able to get to a point in your idea, your concept, where you can tell a story about what that company is going to be and what's the problem it's going to solve. And like you said, the product market fit, who's going to pay for this and how much, definitely seems like a good, something that you need to have in place before you go out and start your own company. So June, over to you. You talked about meeting your co-founder and obviously coming out of UCLA. But for what, how did you guys kind of navigate, getting out of UCLA and starting a company?
So when I met Austin, Austin already have relations with the potential investor who want to invest. And then we start to engage with investor early. So they are IndieBio, that's amazing accelerator and investor. It's in San Francisco. They help us from the beginning, before even we incorporate the company. So they give us advice on how to incorporate the companies, how to license technology, everything, the advice that I needed at the beginning. They gave us valuable advices. So we got a lot of help from our investor.
That's good. And for you, what was, I guess, most challenging about that early stage of navigating this, getting it out of a university?
Yes, so first one was our technology it's hard to believe to non-technical people, like most of the time, right? Investors, people, team members. Uh, but like when I met my co-founder Austin, I believe him first instead of believing technology. That was the first thing, first moment that we decided to go out for business. He got married. He had a new kid. And he was like, I know this one. I believe this technology. So let's go together. So that's how we went out. So that was the moment that we started to go out, and then how we navigate. We have this amazing technology. How we're gonna make people believe? That was the hard part, right? So we start to put our technology on social media to see who are interested, and we actually got pull from the market that they want to use this technology for research purpose, right? R&D for animals, humans, drug. There are so many pools that we built. So okay, let's launch our technology in the research market first, so that we can get some like market validation. Now people, uh, almost half of the customer they gave us the sample, they are doing second project with us because they like the results. So that was the validation. Now we are scaling up.
That's great. And I like how you talked about the relationship with your co-founder, Austin, and believing in him first before the technology. I think it's not, dissimilar from how an investor looks at a company too. They want to believe the founder and then they dive into the technology. Matt, was there something you wanted to add there? I saw you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and June touched on this a bit too, and you definitely did, which is around the storytelling piece. And so, for anyone in the audience who's thinking about starting your company, I can tell you that a struggle that I always had is, you're thinking about the elevator pitch. How am I going to describe what I do in 30 seconds? And immediately, as scientists, what we'll do is we'll talk about the technical solution we have, right? So with Evid, it was, oh, this machine can read all these papers, and then people say, well, so what? Right. And so it's all about, in the beginning, finding that use case and really being able to lead your elevator pitch with the core problem that you're solving, right? Like, people spend too much money and time going through the literature, therefore the AI can help, something like that. And so, that once you kind of can have crisp thoughts around that, I think that's when you're starting around the path to actually commercializing and spinning out.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, I think in our prep call, or in a different conversation I was having earlier this week, we were talking about technology looking for a solution. So, people having a really brilliant technology, oftentimes, scientists, fall in love with what they're doing and think it's the greatest thing, but they haven't thought about, how is this going to be applied? How is this going to be used? And again, you need to know who's going to pay for it. I think that's essential for any successful business to bring in some revenue. But I think one of the other things I wanted to touch on when you guys were talking about like coming out of your university or your innovation hub, some of the key resources that you needed to have in place or that helped you early on. June, you talked about IndieBio, being there for you. I know they're kind of an accelerator, and so they help companies exactly with this problem. Similarly, that's what we do at Medtech Innovator is help companies navigate these early stages. But what other things, kind of helped you guys in this early spin out phase? Maybe talking about, your founding team, the leadership, legal counsel, anything like that. So maybe June, you want to go first?
Okay, so really we got a lot of help. Indiva is the first one, and then we got help from UCLA Anderson Engineering School, Bio Design Program, CNS side. There were so many help that we got. I think the most important part is we need to try to find someone who can give us advice that help us to get the licensing deal with UCLA. Like who should I work with? Have you worked with someone who have done this many deals? Then we find the person who have done before them. They will introduce us to the legal team, right? So that's how we met our lawyer, and then met our investors, advisors. So yeah, so legal team is really necessary when we talk to our university for the licensing deal. I hope that can be changed later so that we can have some like default deal without spending that much time. But having good advisor on who have license before, and advisor will help you to spin off at the beginning to get the license, and other advisors to do the market validation, marketing, everything. You just look for people who have done that before. I think that's faster way. Of course, you can just do yourself, but yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, and you brought up legal, which I think is very important. Finding somebody, you know, who's kind of worked in this space before or done something similar, obviously can help out a lot, especially in those negotiations. Matt, over, you know, to you guys, what kind of resources did you guys have in place, or what was essential in those early days of the spin out?
Yeah. So firstly, just like June said, is advice, mentors, finding people that you can rely on these different things. So Steve, who's the president of Inferlink, has done a lot of companies before. We've done a lot together previously. Prior to Avid Science, we've done a number of companies. And so, you know, finding folks like that and other entrepreneurs that are out there that are more experienced to lean on and ask them questions, that's really, really crucial. Another one is the startup attorneys that you're going to pick. You know, you want to find someone who can help you make sure that everything is on sound footing to begin with. I think we were joking on a previous call, like LegalZoom. Hopefully there's nobody LegalZoom on the line. It's a fantastic service, but it's probably not going to be sufficient for these incredibly complicated deals that you're going to have to do with, you know, IP rights and all this kind of stuff. And especially if you're going to go down the venture route, you want to have an attorney that can help explain what's happening during the venture process, because there's an information asymmetry generally between early entrepreneurs and the VC funds. So, you know, attorneys can help there. Also getting your accounting squared away. For us, you know, I think an early and challenging thing is you really have to look at yourself seriously and figure out where you're deficient, and then hire people to kind of support your weaknesses. So, you know, from a practical perspective, for instance, the very first person that we hired at Avid Science was a salesperson, because, you know, we're technologists by training, we're scientists by training, and we knew that we don't have that kind of capability and experience. And so, you know, really, you need to look at yourself and your team and say, well, what do we lack? And that sometimes can be hard, but you really need to be honest about it, because those early hires are super crucial. So, you know, get your legal squared away, get your accounting squared away, because that's pretty important. And you know, it's hard. Find as many good mentors as you can, and then hire for your weaknesses, I'd say.
And I think you touched on another point, which is about advisors. I think you both mentioned that. But so speaking, I mean, there's people who are informal advisors and mentors to you. What about, you know, do you have a scientific advisory board or a commercial advisory board? Are there people who are working with you guys in a more formal capacity? And how did you build those relationships? June, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, so I have formal and informal advisors. Formal means we usually give some share to the people. Informal means they just want to help us. We got this mentorship and mentors and advisor. We got this advisor and mentor through our investors, our school friend, our other entrepreneurs, or some scientists who know about this field. You know, so we met them and then they like us. That's how we built the advisory board.
In that, I was asking about, you know, informal and formal advisors. You know, how did you go about building out your formal advisors, the ones that they're part of your kind of board?
Yeah. So some of our investors took board seats. We had a number of scientific and product advisors as well. One of them came through an NIH proposal. He was on it, even though he wasn't part of the company. He was part of the hospital system that he was part of. And you know, otherwise it was, you know, networking. So, you know, one of our amazing advisors, actually really two of them, came from that same salesperson that we hired. He knew a lot of great people that we were able to connect through that. So, you know, a lot of it is networking, you know, finding people that you can, you know, get value from, they can get value from you and you blend with. But, you know, it's hard to be prescriptive. Really just kind of get out there as much as you can and good things will happen, I think.
That's great. And I think you also touched on, you know, how small your team is. I think any startup, any spin out is going to have a couple key people. But as you grow and as you expand, it's going to be important to bring on some high quality folks who can fill those gaps. Like you mentioned, you know, Matt, you needed a commercial person. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your lessons learned as far as human capital and what you guys kind of looked for when you were building out your team, what specific qualities in a person made them a good fit for your company.
Yeah, so there's general ones, and then I tell you specifically what I did for the salesperson and how we found him, and he was amazing. So in general, at a startup, you know, initiative and curiosity are so important because everyone's going to have to wear a lot of hats. So you want everyone to just do a bunch of stuff, right, without having to ask and coordinate. And then the curiosity is really important, because if someone doesn't know how to do something, you want them to be able to figure it out themselves, right? There's just a few of you and you're doing, many, many people's jobs. So, we took it very, very seriously from a company culture perspective to hire people who had initiative, who had curiosity. Obviously, we're smart and skilled for the roles, but, that above and beyond everything else. And then when it came to specific skill sets, if there was an area that we didn't know about or we didn't understand, so salesperson was a really good example. I actually went out to the network of people I knew, and I found people that were senior, business development professionals, very senior business development professionals. And I said, look, how am I going to hire for this role? What, from practical things like what do commission structures look like to, what are the kind of key interview questions I want to do? Like, not sell me this pen, right? But like, really like, what are the key things? And then, when you're hiring those early key roles, sometimes you really want to be very particular about that and very active in how you hire them. And so for that role, for instance, we didn't actually go out to any particular sites, like hiring sites. We actually, again, used the network. And there was someone that I had been introduced to who was on a separate phone call, one of these kind of like early calls before we were really productized. And I cold emailed him and I said, look, I know you know a lot of people. Do you happen to know anybody who's in business development who's looking for a role and they're hungry and they're ready to join a startup? And that's the person that we hired. So this kind of just outreach to someone who is 1 degree away ended up with such a key hire for us. So I think that's kind of one way to do it too, is to really think about the person that you want and then just go and find that person. And it's really on you as the early entrepreneurs to do that. Don't outsource that, because it's just so important for you to learn about the people and the roles for these early activities.
So did you ever work with like a formal search agency, or was it all kind of word of mouth and social?
Yeah, we ended up, as we grew, we started to use, like the traditional hiring websites, although we have a very particular hiring process that we developed that really kind of tested for skills, but really culture fit too. Really culture add. I don't like culture fit because you end up with like everybody's the same. But really testing for curiosity and in kind of initiative. But then like can this person add something unique? But we never really hired any kind of headhunters or anything like that, because it's so important, especially early, that you understand the role that you're trying to hire for. And if you outsource it, you may not get what you're thinking. You're not going to learn about the strengths, the weaknesses of the people in those roles.
Right. And June, I know that you've got a smaller team over there, and you guys are at the beginning of your hiring. But you talked a little bit about, buying into Austin first. So maybe, from a people perspective, what were his strengths? What really made you believe?
At the time, I think it was the risk that he was taking, right? If he was taking that much risk, there is something, right? And then I have time to validate it. So that's what I did. And he's just a good person in general. When I he's the someone that I want to have lunch, dinner, go out, hang out. That was the basic thing. And then as we work together, we learn each other and we start to see the common values between Austin and I look for. So that's the values that we are looking for from our new employees or team members. So I think it's always a person who I want to hang out, and I want to have people in our office.
No, it's a good test. I mean, they talk about, the airplane test. Who do you want to be stuck on a 10-hour flight with and hold a conversation? I guess, maybe for both of you, if you want to put it out there, is there are you guys hiring at all? Are you looking for anybody to join your teams?
Yes. So if you go to the Genesis site, I think we have something like 15 or 20 open roles right now. And that number is increasing significantly over the year.
How about you, Jim?
Yeah, we are looking for LCMS technician and bioinformatic person who are excited about our data.
Great. So the next thing I want to talk about is funding. I think team, technology are important, but funding is also really important, especially as far as keeping your employees there. So how did, fundraising, your strategy change once you were spun out, or did it change? And how have you kind of navigated fundraising to keep the company going? So Matt, we'll start with you.
Sure. And I apologize. I keep having these internet hiccups. So if I'm frozen, hopefully it's at least an entertaining frozen screen for you all. So, it's a great question. You have to ask yourself early whether you want to get on the venture capital train or not, because those are going to be two very different paths, and one is not better than the other. There are a lot of amazing companies out there that didn't take venture funding, and they did that with a particular reason. They want to develop a business that may not scale as much, but gives everybody kind of an amazing quality of life. If you want the venture funding path to go on, then you have to be really sure that you can get to particular levels of revenue. So early on, you'll have to convince yourself and be honest about it with yourself. Are there enough potential customers in the world who will pay this amount of money for the thing that I'm going to develop? Because that's going to be tested over and over again. And as you raise money, you're going to hit different hurdles that you have to overcome. And fundamentally, it's whatever market you're in that's going to drive that. We knew Evid had the potential to be a venture-backed business, and that the market was big enough. And so as soon as we spun out, we went and got initial proof points, used that to raise seed money, used the follow-on kind of proof points to raise a little bit more. But it's a challenge. But we knew we were on that path. And we would have still been on that path if we didn't get acquired. Our acquisition was more or less opportunistic, but that once you're on that treadmill of the fundraising, you really do want to hit those goals and keep it going. And so, I think there's early decisions that need to be made, because it's really hard to back off that path once you're on it.
Right, and you alluded earlier to the SBIR funding that went into that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that helped, and and any advice others have for others who are navigating that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the SBIR programs are amazing. There are also STTR programs out there. So for those of you that are in the university, the difference between STTR and SBIR is SBIR is for small companies. STTR is between partnerships between small companies and universities. And it's actually a great way because you can ahead of time decide what IP goes with whom and what might be joint. So it's actually a nice way to commercialize certain university research. And the SBIR programs themselves really fill a gap in the market where VCs might be too risk averse, right? You're going to propose a brand new piece of science and technology, and the way science and technology works, it may not come to fruition, right? I mean, that's why we do science and we push the envelope, and it doesn't always work out. And the SBIR program is to say, look, we know that you're a small company and you're taking this risk, and we're willing to fund that risk. It's non-dilutive capital as well. So what that means is that you're not selling a piece of your company in exchange for this. Rather you're getting funding, and it's treated like a grant. And so it's a really fantastic way to get a lot of those early proof points that you'll need in terms of technology development, early customer conversations, all of that kind of stuff that you'll need if you want to go down the venture route. So I highly recommend it. Now, that being said, it's extremely competitive. These are really, really hard awards to get. And depending on what agency you're trying to get the award from, there are different assumed assumptions about what you're doing. So if you're going for NIH funding, for instance, you'll need a physician on board in order to generally be considered a competitive application. In general, you'll want someone with advanced degrees on board across the agencies, again, to be considered competitively. So I could go on and on about this topic, but it's a wonderful program, and I really do encourage everyone to look at it. The challenge is going to be cash flow. So if you're intending to run your business based on the government paying you on certain timescales, extend those timescales. It may take longer than you think. So that's the real challenge. So it's not all just gravy. But if you can navigate that, it's a great way to get things going.
And June, over to you, just talking a little bit about funding. How has Dalton been funded? Did you guys ever do any non-dilutive, or it's something that you guys are going after?
So we haven't done non-dilutive funding, but we highly recommend because it's non-dilutive. Dalton got the funding from ventures, other angels, and institutional investor from the beginning. The reason is because, at the beginning, how much do we need to de-risk our technology and validate our technology in the market? That's the point that investor will start to invest on you or your company. So the machine that we are using is $500,000, like more than $500,000. To have a lab and to have some lab technician, it takes a lot of money. So if we went to the government funding, maybe it takes too long. So we decide to go to just venture round and then raise money so that we can get the machine and de-risk our technology, validate, and scale up.
Great. And Matt, one thing I wanted to touch on with you, you mentioned obviously non-dilutive and all this, but when you were, talking about spinning out, was there a certain amount of runway that you guys needed to establish before, it was safe to take that leap?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think one of the magical things about a model that's spun out based on SBIR funding is that you can actually take SBIR funding for the underlying organization and then spin out the company and do licensing agreements so that the IP and some of the development can help pay that way forward. So, you can kind of balance private capital with the government capital and actually have, kind of multiple people pushing on that. Now, in general, I'm even though I'm an entrepreneur, I'm relatively risk averse. And I think we would generally try to do 12 months of runway, which actually is probably less than I would recommend to companies. I will say one piece of fundraising advice is raise more earlier than you think, because things will take a lot longer than you think they will. So, if you have 6 months of runway, I would say that's probably not enough unless you already have customers involved. Now, I'm speaking from a business-to-business world where our customers were pharmaceutical companies, large pharmaceutical companies, and biotech companies. So it could take you 6 months just to get a signature on a contract. So, I think the question is a good one. And I think it really comes down to what you expect your sales cycles to be and what you expect that early demand to be. Then add in a big buffer because you're definitely going to be wrong. And then, that's kind of the right amount.
Yeah, and I guess a question for both of you. We're still in the middle of the pandemic. How has it affected your business? Either from a fundraising strategy, or human capital, or technology partnerships. Have there been any setbacks you've had to navigate as a result of that? So June, let's start with you.
So that's really I think there were good thing and bad thing. Okay, so bad thing was when the pandemic was announced, we were raising price seed round. Like we said, we're gonna close that week, and the pandemic happened. So every investor were just like, "What's going on?" Everyone was like not replying and stuff. So we changed the funding strategy from price seed round to extend. Like we get some more safe notes, like the bridge round. That was the bad news. But the good news is, because of pandemic, many customers actually start to make deals without meeting us in person. So like there were so many customers just have a Zoom, and then we explain our technology and data, and then they just move forward. So because of that, we were able to close many sales without travel. Like we are only 3 people, 4 people, all right? So that was helpful. Yeah, that was good part.
That's great. I like the framing of the bad news and good news. Sounds like the good news outweighed the bad news. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, very similar. So, it was surprising the number of deals that we were able to close post-pandemic remotely. Traditionally we would go to the headquarters of these, large companies, and you meet the person, and then after that is when you start to really kind of get down to business on the contract negotiations and things like that. And that didn't happen post-pandemic. We have customers that we've never met in real life, which I would have told you pre-pandemic would never happen in this industry, and it certainly did. Now, the flip side and the bad news is that we went remote. Everybody was remote, and maintaining and building company culture is really hard, I think, in the COVID environment. Now we're a distributed company with people in the UK, people in New Jersey, people in California, Washington, Virginia, and it's hard to kind of keep everybody aligned across time zones and happy and maintain the culture. And so, you have to spend a lot more time and, a lot more thinking cycles, around that. Whereas before, everybody's in the office and it was awesome and everybody's able to chat, right? And so I think that's been kind of the biggest challenge.
Have you guys done anything creative to keep that going?
We did one really awesome event where it was kind of like a quiz show game, and we got the whole company. So it's like 120 something of us together, and people were randomly assigned to teams. So it was like, from all the geographies, and you had to work to solve these puzzles together. And and they were silly, right? Like there's like a dance one, and then there's like, interpret this image one, and like, just regular old facts and stuff like that. And that was a lot of fun, actually.
Very cool. And I guess one other question I have, did you guys do any hiring? Have you hired anybody on your team that you never met in person?
I have. key members of my team that I've never met in person. And so, the joke is always kind of like, I'll see you when I see you, I guess, but that was definitely a different experience.
How about you, June? Have you guys hired anyone you haven't worked with or met in person yet?
We hired, but it didn't go well.
Oh, I hear you. It's challenging, it's a different environment that we're all in, but I think we're all making it work with virtual events such as these. So, one other thing I wanted to touch on, thinking back on and everything you guys have learned, with the spin out, was there anything that was like really surprising to you, or, big setback, beyond COVID, that you had to overcome?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead,
okay,
June.
Matt. Let's go with Matt. You're ready to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a period where we got pretty low on payroll, which I think lots of entrepreneurs have been at, and that's scary. It's scary, especially because you're close to having to lay off people that you're pretty close to, or finding a different way. We were going to become kind of engineers by the hour, to kind of keep the lights on, and that's a scary thing. But the lesson from that is that as long as you kind of keep grinding through, I think good things happen. That was, I think, the biggest surprise from that was that we did grind through, and then good things really did happen. You hear it a lot, and surely we're lucky, right? But that really was the case, and just our general resilience as a company was both awesome and surprising.
How about you, June?
I see. I totally agree. There are good days and bad days. Like during this Dalton, I don't know how many times we cut our salary to zero or cut half. We do all the time so that we can make our company survive and have enough runway, so that we can raise money and go to the next stage. We can do this because we believe in this technology, we believe in vision, and it will happen. There are bad days that we get so burned out, but we just keep going, and then we find good customers, good partners, good investors, good employees. Then everything get better. So I just hope everyone just do it and then just keep going. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to the theme of accelerating a spinoff, what kind of factor I think really sped up that whole thing for you, or the company? Like, what would have taken you much longer if you didn't have this? Maybe Matt, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, definitely relying on the expertise of people who have done it before, right? It's a shortcut to leverage what they've done and their expertise. So, meet really good people if you can, hire really good people if you can, and let them do their thing. And that will dramatically accelerate your commercial path. We tend, at least I tended to think, oh, I know everything. I'm a technologist, but I don't need help. But you do need help. And it really will speed things up, to listen to what people tell you and listen to their advice and rely on their help.
Yeah, and June, you mentioned IndieBio. I know they were really helpful and for you guys. I think you mentioned you even were at their demo day before you even had everything in place. So was there anything else that happened along the way that really sped things up for you?
I think I totally agree. It was the mentor that helped us, mentor that gave us all the advices. I think finding right person, and I was thinking, am I really good at networking? Then can I make everyone in the room as my friend? If I can, then how can I make friends with someone who know everyone, right? That was my strategy. So I that's why I went to all the accelerator programs. I went to 3-4 accelerator programs, so that because they know everyone already. I think leveraging that network is really important.
I think that's a great little plug, especially for me over here at an accelerator. Really is what we specialize in is creating a network and connecting people, finding out what your needs are, and finding out somebody who can help you out with that. We're getting to the last 5 minutes here, so I want to leave with some general advice you guys want to share to other entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs to be. So maybe June, if there's some advice you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I think the most important part is customer, the users. So at the end, like there are many people who will help you, investors, school people, school, or even your friends will help you a lot. But at the end, the reason why we leave, why company leave, is because we make service and product that customers satisfy. With that, money will come, team member will come, everything will come. So I hope everyone just focus on finding customer who love your technology, you love your idea, and want to test.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on. Customers are very, important ambassadors too. I've talked to companies who have a great technology, but then it's when I actually meet the customer and I hear their feedback that I'm like, oh wow, this is actually really incredible. Matt, so over to you. Any general advice you want to share?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Customer centricity is so important. It's sort of this notion that revenue cures all ills, as June said. If you're making money, everybody's happy. So really do think about the problem you're solving first, not the technology you're building, and really focus on your customer. And then the other one is just you have to do the grind. It's just have to keep pushing through it as an entrepreneur. And even if things don't work out, you have all that experience, which will help you with the next thing. And the longer your company is around, the more opportunity there is for really good things to happen. So just bear in mind that it's a grind. All the entrepreneurs have gone through it. Even the companies that seem like overnight success took probably 3 or 4 years, and then you're just hearing about them now. So just do the grind and think about your customers, and really good things will happen.
There was another piece of advice you shared, I think, during our prep call, which I liked, which was spend money on the people that will keep you out of jail.
Yeah, that's right. So good advice I got from someone. If someone's role can keep you out of jail, don't cut the corners there, right? Your accountants and your attorneys, they will help you. So.
I love that. That's great advice. One last kind of closing question I have for you guys. Resources. There might be people in the audience that can help you out. So beyond hiring, those positions that you have open, is there any advice or mentors or anyone you're looking to meet?
So yeah, go ahead, June.
Okay. So I was eager to jump in because I'm looking for new team members. We are hiring bioinformatics person. Next year, we are going to hire positions like salesperson, bioinformatics, lab technician next year. So anyone who were excited about our technology and the data that we generate and want to really save lives with the knowledge that you have learned and create at Dalton, yeah, please let me know.
Yeah, and I'll actually flip that a little bit. So I've been super lucky in my career thus far. With the exit, and the current company is just growing like crazy. So if there's anyone in the audience who thinks that I can benefit them in some way, please don't hesitate. My email is my first dot, my last name at gmail.com. I don't even think you need the dot in there. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to be helpful where I can.
And June, what's the best way for people to meet you as well, or reach you?
You can Google Bioanalytics.com and then just contact me, to write the information in the page, or you can just contact me through email, seungjun.yo@daltonbioanalytics.com.
Great. And June, for all the investors out there, when did you say you were going to be raising your
next
round?
year, summer, A round, yeah.
Great. So everyone keep an eye out on that. All right. Well, I want to thank our panelists, Matt and June. Excellent conversation, really great advice, and really enjoyed hearing about what you guys are working on, how you're changing the world, and also what you learned along your way of spinning out a new company. So that was great. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and the excellent moderation.
Thank you so much.